I bought a dying man's gold mine for a bottle of whiskey. He said the mountain was cursed, that every man who dug into her belly came out in a pine box or didn't come out at all. I didn't believe in curses. I believed in greed. But when I found her, a woman chained in the deepest tunnel, alive for 30 years in absolute darkness, I learned some debts can only be paid in blood, and some curses don't end until you burn everything to the ground. These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. The town of Bitter Springs sat in the shadow of Iron Maiden Mountain like a guilty conscience. It wasn't the kind of place you found on purpose. You stumbled into it when every other road had closed, when your luck had run so thin you could see daylight through it. The buildings leaned against each other like drunks after last call, their paint peeled away by wind that never stopped howling down from the peaks. The saloon's sign creaked on rusted chains, and the general store's windows were so caked with dust you couldn't tell if anyone was inside or if it was just another tomb. I rode in on a November afternoon when the sky looked like hammered iron. My horse, a gray mare I'd won in a card game in Santa Fe, picked her way through the rutted main street with the caution of an animal that knew bad luck when she smelled it. The few people I saw moved like shadows, quick and furtive, disappearing into doorways before I could get a good look at their faces. That should have been my first warning. In towns like this, people either want something from you or want you gone. There's no middle ground. The saloon was called the Broken Promise, which seemed about right. Inside, it smelled of spilled whiskey, sawdust, and the particular sourness of men who'd given up washing. A dozen pairs of eyes turned toward me when I pushed through the doors, measuring, calculating. I'd been measured before. I walked to the bar with the kind of confidence you either earn or fake until someone calls your bluff. The bartender was a skeleton wrapped in skin. His eyes sunk so deep in his skull, they looked like they were trying to hide. "Whiskey?" I said, laying a coin on the bar. "The real kind, not whatever rocket you're watering down for the miners." He poured without comment, and I drank without pleasure. It was real whiskey, which meant Bitter Springs still had some connection to the outside world, even if it looked like it had been cut off from God and reason. I was halfway through my second glass when he appeared beside me, an old man who moved so quietly I didn't hear him approach. He was ancient, his face a roadmap of wrinkles that spoke of too many years in the sun, too many disappointments, too much knowledge that no one wanted to hear. "You got the look of a man running from something," he said. His voice was like gravel sliding down a mountainside, rough and full of things that might hurt you. "Everyone's running from something," I replied. "Question is whether you're running towards something worse." He smiled, revealing teeth like old fence posts, brown, crooked, barely holding on. "Philosophical. I like that. Shows intelligence. Intelligence is rare here." He gestured to the bartender, who poured him a glass without being asked. "Name's Silas McCready. I own the Iron Maiden mine. Or I did, before she decided she owned me instead." I'd heard of the Iron Maiden. Every prospector west of the Mississippi had heard the stories. A silver vein so rich it made men stupid with dreams of wealth, and a death toll so high it made those same men smart enough to stay away. 16 men had died in that mine over the past decade, according to the rumors. Some in cave-ins, some in accidents with dynamite, some in ways that didn't make sense unless you believed in things that couldn't be explained by engineering or bad luck. "Not buying," I said. "I'm just passing through." "Everyone says that." Silas drained his glass and gestured for another. The bartender poured without hesitation, without payment. That told me Silas either owned the bar or owed so much money that the bartender had given up trying to collect. But the mountain has a way of keeping what it wants. You feel it yet? That pressure in your chest, like invisible hands squeezing? That's her, the Iron Maiden. She's awake, and she's watching. I should have walked away, should have finished my drink, climbed back on my horse, and ridden until Bitter Springs was nothing but a bad memory. But I didn't. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was the desperation that had brought me this far, the debts I'd left behind, the men I'd crossed, the life I'd burned down because staying meant dying slowly. Or maybe it was something else, something I felt but couldn't name. That pressure Silas mentioned, like the mountain itself was breathing, and I was caught in its rhythm. "What are you offering?" I asked. Silas's smile widened. "The mine. Complete ownership. Every tunnel, every vein, every ounce of silver still sleeping in her belly. There's fortune there, friend. Enough to buy a new life anywhere you want. Mexico, California, back east where they don't ask questions if your money's good." "In exchange for what?" He pulled a bottle from his coat, good whiskey, the kind with a label and a cork. "This. One bottle. That's all I want. And for you to take what's coming to me instead of letting it take me." I studied him. His hand shook, not from age but from something deeper. Fear. Bone deep. Existential fear that no amount of whiskey could drown. His eyes kept darting toward the door, toward the windows, toward the mountain outside like he expected it to reach down and pluck him from his seat. "What's really in that mine, Silas?" "Silver," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Silver and death. Mostly death. She doesn't like being dug into the mountain. Doesn't like being violated. Every man I sent down came back changed. Or didn't come back at all. The last one, Jacob Brenner, good man, family man. We found him 3 days after he didn't come up. Still breathing. Sitting in Tunnel 7 with a pickaxe in his lap. But his eyes..." Silas shuddered. His eyes were gone. Not gouged out, not damaged. Just gone. Empty sockets that went down forever. And he was smiling. The saloon had gone quiet. Everyone was listening now, though they pretended not to. This was a story they'd heard before. A story they were tired of hearing. Or maybe they were just tired of watching men fool enough to believe they could beat the mountain. I took the bottle. Don't know why. Greed, probably. Or that particular brand of stupidity that convinces men they're different, special, immune to the things that killed everyone else. Silas's relief was immediate and pathetic. He actually sagged against the bar like puppet with cut strings. "Papers are my office," he said. "Deed maps, equipment manifests. All legal, all yours. You can take possession tomorrow morning." "Why not tonight?" "Because no one goes up the mountain at night. Not anymore. Not since..." He stopped himself, shook his head. "Tomorrow. Dawn. I'll meet you at the mine entrance." But he didn't. When dawn came, and I rode up the winding trail to the Iron Maiden mine, Silas McCready was hanging from a beam outside the main entrance, a rope around his neck and his feet swaying 3 feet above the ground. His face was purple, tongue protruding, eyes bulged and glassy. But worst was his expression. Not fear, not pain, relief. Like dying was the best thing that had happened to him in years. And carved into the wooden beam above his head, fresh enough that sap still wept from the cuts. "She's yours now." The mine entrance yawned before me like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. The timber frames were solid, surprisingly so, given the stories, but something about them felt wrong. The wood was too dark, stained not by age or weather, but by something else. Something that had seeped into the grain and changed it from the inside. I'd seen enough death to recognize its fingerprints. No one from town had come with me. I'd asked, offered good money, but the responses had been universal. Shaken heads, averted eyes, sudden remembrances of urgent business elsewhere. The bartender had crossed himself when I mentioned it. The blacksmith had actually laughed, a sound without humor that made my skin crawl. "You want to go down there?" he'd said. "Go. Just don't expect company. And don't expect to come back the same." I'd cut Silas down myself, wrapped him in canvas, dragged him to the town's excuse for a cemetery. Nobody helped. Nobody watched except from windows and doorways, shadows observing another fool's journey toward inevitable disaster. The sheriff, if you could call him that. The badge looked like it had been pinned to his vest by accident, had written up Silas's death as suicide without even riding up to see the body. "Case closed," he'd said, and the relief on his face was identical to what I'd seen on Silas's corpse. Now I stood alone at the mine entrance with my lantern, my rifle, and my rapidly eroding confidence. The morning sun didn't penetrate far into the tunnel, just painted the first 10 feet in weak light that seemed reluctant to commit. Beyond that was darkness, so complete it looked solid, like you could take a knife and carve pieces from it. The mine's main tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, wide enough for a cart on rails. The rails themselves were rusty, but intact, disappearing into the black. Support timbers crossed overhead every 6 feet, methodical and professional. Whoever had dug the Iron Maiden knew what they were doing from an engineering standpoint. But engineering couldn't explain the smell that drifted up from below. Not decay, not minerals, but something organic and wrong, like breathing through a wound. I lit my lantern and started down. Temperature dropped immediately. That particular cold that has nothing to do with weather and everything to do with being buried alive. My footsteps echoed oddly, the sound bouncing back too quickly, too sharply, like the mountain was throwing them back at me in mockery. Every 20 feet I'd find a branching tunnel, some sealed with rockfall, others opening into darkness my lantern couldn't pierce. Painted numbers marked each branch, 2, 3, 4. I counted them as I descended, watching for Tunnel 7. That's where they'd found Jacob Brenner. That's where his eyes had gone missing. The map Silas had left showed a simple layout. Main artery down, lateral branches for following the silver veins, and at the very bottom, a cavern marked only with a question mark and the notation, "Do not enter," in capital letters underlined 3 times. Subtle. It took 20 minutes to reach Tunnel 7. The entrance was wider than the others, the timber frame reinforced with iron bands. Someone had nailed boards across it, a crude barrier that wouldn't stop anyone determined. The boards had been ripped away from the inside. I could see the splinters, still fresh, and the nails bent backward like fingers that had been broken. I should have turned back. The smart play was obvious. Climb back to surface, ride to the nearest large town, sell the deed to someone else foolish enough to believe they could beat the curse, take whatever money I could get and disappear. But I didn't. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was that pressure I'd felt since arriving, growing stronger the deeper I went. Or maybe it was the sound. Singing. A woman's voice, distant and distorted by stone and space, singing something that might have been a lullaby, or might have been a dirge. The melody was beautiful in the way that poisonous flowers are beautiful, lovely enough to draw you close before the venom hits. It was coming from Tunnel 7. I chambered a round on my rifle and stepped through. The tunnel opened into a larger space after 30 feet, a natural cavern that had been partially excavated, partially left in its original formation. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like teeth, and the floor was uneven, forcing me to watch my footing. Equipment lay scattered everywhere. Picks, shovels, or carts tipped on their sides, lanterns hanging from hooks hammered into the rock. Everything was covered in dust except for a path worn smooth through the center. Recent. Someone had been here recently, walking the same route over and over until the stone remembered. The singing was louder now. I could almost make out words, though the language wasn't English, wasn't Spanish or any native tongue I'd heard. It was older, the syllables rough and angular like they were meant to be carved rather than spoken. Hello. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the immensity of the underground space. Is someone there? The singing stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the absence, so complete I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood moving through my veins, the minute creak of leather as I shifted my grip on the rifle. Then, from somewhere ahead in the darkness beyond my lantern's reach, "Are you the new master?" The voice was a woman's, but wrong. The tone was right, the pitch was right, but the texture was like rust scraping across glass, like vocal cords that hadn't been used properly in so long they'd forgotten how. "I'm looking for the owner of this mine," I said carefully, raising the lantern. "Silas McCready sent me." "Silas is dead." I felt him leave. The voice came from a different direction now, behind me. I spun, but there was nothing there. They always leave. They always die. They cannot bear what they've done, so they break and scatter. But you feel different. You feel like you might stay. Show yourself. Are you certain? Once seen, some things cannot be unseen. once known. Some truths cannot be forgotten. I didn't come down here to play games. Show yourself or I'm leaving. Laughter echoed through the cavern, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Then the darkness at the edge of my lantern light moved. Not shadows shifting, but something emerging from shadow, pulling itself into reality like a moth from a cocoon. She was tall, impossibly thin, her skin pale enough to be translucent. Her dress had been white once, but was gray now with dust and time, hanging from her frame in tatters. Her hair reached her waist, black and lustrous despite the decades of underground captivity. But her eyes, God help me, her eyes. They weren't empty like Jacob Brenner's had been. They were full of starlight and darkness, full of silver veins and mountain stone, full of every man who died in this mine and every secret the mountain kept. They were the Iron Maiden's eyes, looking out through a human face. "Welcome," she said, and smiled with teeth too sharp, too white. "Welcome, new master, to your inheritance. My name is Magdalene. I've been waiting so very long for someone strong enough to set me free." Magdalene didn't move like a person. She glided across the uneven cavern floor as if gravity had forgotten to claim her, her tattered dress trailing behind like morning mist. The chain around her ankle rattled with each step, thick iron links anchored to a bolt driven deep into the living rock. The metal had worn a groove in the stone from decades of pacing the same circular path, a prison measured in footsteps and madness. "Don't be afraid," she said, though her voice carried no comfort. "Fear is what killed the others. Fear made their hearts beat too fast, made their blood sing too loudly. The mountain heard them. She always hears." I kept the rifle raised, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. You can't shoot a curse. Can't put a bullet through whatever dark bargain had been made in this place. But the weight of the weapon was familiar, comforting, a reminder that not everything in the world was supernatural. Sometimes the only monster was the one looking back from the mirror. "Who chained you here?" I asked. "The first master, the man who found the silver. He dug too deep, struck a vein that shouldn't exist, and when the mountain bled, she demanded payment." Magdalene traced her fingers along the chain, almost lovingly. "He offered me, his daughter, his only child, promised I would serve the mountain's hunger so the silver would flow freely. And it has, hasn't it? For 30 years, the Iron Maiden has made men rich." 30 years. My throat was dry. "You've been down here for 30 years? Time moves differently in the dark. Sometimes it's been minutes, sometimes centuries. The mountain breathes, and I breathe with her. We've become intimate." She tilted her head, studying me with those impossible eyes. "You're wondering if I'm real or if the isolation has driven me mad. The answer is both. I'm real enough to bleed, mad enough to sing, and hungry enough to eat you if you're foolish enough to let me." I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, climb back to the surface, keep riding until Bitter Springs was a memory and the Iron Maiden was someone else's nightmare. But something held me there. Maybe it was her eyes. Despite their strangeness, I saw intelligence in them. Pain. A desperate, furious will to survive that I recognized because I carried the same thing. "The others who died," I said. "Did you kill them?" "No. The mountain killed them. I tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. They saw me as a ghost, a hallucination, something to be conquered or ignored. They dug deeper, opened tunnels they shouldn't have touched, and the mountain claimed its price." She moved closer, close enough that I could see her face clearly in the lantern light. She'd been beautiful once. Might still be beautiful if you look past the wrong angles of her features, the too sharp teeth, the eyes that reflected light like an animal's. But you're asking questions. You're listening. That's different. What do you want? Freedom. The word was simple, but the weight behind it was tremendous. Break my chain. Let me walk under open sky again. In return, the mine is yours with no curse, no deaths, no price to pay except the one already paid. And if I refuse? Her smile was all teeth. Then you join the others. Not immediately. The mountain is patient. but she'll wear you down. Pick at the edges of your sanity until you're hollow. You'll dig and dig, following veins that lead nowhere, finding silver that turns to dust in your hands. One day you'll put a rope around your neck like Silas did, grateful for the release. Or maybe you'll take a pickaxe to your own eyes like Jacob Brenner, desperate to stop seeing what the darkness shows you. I studied the chain. The bolt looked old, rusted, but the mechanism was still solid. I'd need tools, time, and answers. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the only honest thing in this mountain. Magdalene sat down on a boulder, the chain pooling around her feet like a metal snake. The silver lies. It promises wealth and delivers death. The darkness lies. It whispers that you're safe, that you're in control, that you can leave whenever you want. But I don't lie. I can't afford to. Lies are for people with options, and I've been out of options for 3 decades. She had a point. Nothing about her screamed trustworthy, but at least her motivations were clear. And despite the wrongness of her appearance, despite the predatory grace of her movements, I didn't sense malice. Hunger, yes. Desperation, absolutely. But not the casual cruelty of something that killed for pleasure. Tell me about the first master, I said, holstering the rifle but keeping my hand near the pistol. Your father. His name was Ezekiel Payne. He was a dreamer who found reality too expensive. Her voice went flat, empty. We came west with nothing, me. Him. My mother who died on the trail somewhere in Kansas. He promised me a better life. Promised we'd be rich, respected, that I'd wear dresses made of silk and marry a gentleman. Then he found this place, started digging, and found her. Her, the mountain's heart, the source of the silver. It's not a vein, not really. It's alive, growing, pulsing, bleeding precious metal like sweat. He touched it, and it showed him things. Wonderful, terrible things. How to be rich, how to be powerful, what he'd have to sacrifice to make it real. Magdalene's hands clenched into fists. I woke up in chains. He was crying, apologizing, saying he had no choice, that the mountain demanded to keep her, someone to tend her heart and make sure she kept bleeding silver. He left me here with enough food and water for a week, said he'd come back for me once he had enough money to break the curse. But he never came back. He died. Oh, he got rich. Built a mansion in Denver, married some society woman, had other children who never knew about me. The mountain kept bleeding silver, and wagons carried it out by the ton. He got everything he wanted. Her eyes blazed with an anger that had been burning for 3 decades. But guilt eats deeper than any acid. 5 years ago, he came back, old, dying, desperate to confess. He stood right where you're standing and told me he was sorry, as if sorry could give me back my life. What did you do? I sang to him. The mountain taught me songs that make men see truth. He saw what he'd done, really saw it. Every day I spent in darkness, every meal of rats and mushrooms, every time I screamed until my throat bled and no one came. He saw it all at once, felt it all at once. His heart stopped right there. She pointed to a darker patch on the cavern floor. They dragged his body out, ruled it natural causes, and the mine passed to Silas McCready, who was too weak to even look at me before he ran. I pulled out my flask, took a long drink. The whiskey helped, though not enough. Let me get this straight. Your father chained you here as payment for magic silver. You've been trapped for 30 years. Every owner since has either gone mad or killed themselves. And you expect me to free you because you're different. She stood again, moving so close I could smell her. Earth and stone, and something floral beneath it, like roses crushed under rock. You're not here for the silver. You're here because you're running, and you know a trap when you see one. You know what it's like to be used and discarded. I can see it in your eyes, the same emptiness that lives in mine. She was right. I had been used, discarded, left for dead by people I trusted. The betrayal that had brought me this far west, running from debts and enemies, had carved something essential out of me. Looking at Magdalene was like looking at a mirror that showed futures instead of reflections. If I free you, I said slowly, what happens to the silver? It stops. The mountain's heart closes. She'll be just a mountain again, dead stone and empty tunnels. But you'll live. You'll own worthless rock and rusted equipment. But you'll walk away with your mind intact and your soul still your own. And if I don't, then we'll have this conversation again in a few months, after the mountain starts working on you. After you hear the singing in your sleep. After you start seeing movement in shadows that shouldn't move. After you realize too late that you're not leaving, that you're already becoming part of her. Magdalene extended her hand, palm up. Choose now. Choose freely. Because once the mountain has her hooks in you, you won't be able to choose anything ever again. I looked at her hand, at the chain, at the darkness beyond my lantern's light. Thought about Silas hanging from that beam with relief on his dead face. Thought about Jacob Brenner with his eyes gone and his smile too wide. Thought about 30 years in the dark, singing to stone because there was nothing else left. Then I pulled out my knife and said, "Show me the heart. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it right." Her smile could have lit the darkness if light was what lived behind those eyes. "Oh," she said, "you're going to be trouble. I like that." Magdalene led me deeper. The tunnels became narrower, cruder, less like professional excavation, and more like something had clawed its way through solid rock. The walls were smooth in places, almost organic, and warm to the touch. The temperature rose the farther down we went, and my shirt stuck to my back with sweat that smelled of fear and copper. The first miners who came after my father didn't know what they were doing, Magdalene said, her voice echoing strangely off the curved walls. They thought they'd found a natural cave system, started mapping it, naming the chambers, talking about geological surveys. Then they reached the heart, and 3 of them died on the spot. Just stopped, like someone had reached inside their chests and turned off their life. She trailed her fingers along the wall, and I swore I saw the stone shiver. The mountain doesn't like strangers in her deepest places. She tolerates me because I'm part of the contract. She'll tolerate you because you're with me. But be careful what you touch. Be careful what you think. This close to her center, she can hear everything. We descended through a series of natural chambers, each one larger and stranger than the last. Crystals grew from the walls, not quartz or ordinary minerals, but something that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent light, casting everything in shades of blue and green. Formations hung from the ceiling that looked more like fossilized organs than stalactites, and everywhere that smell sweet and rotten, like flowers blooming in a grave. "Here." Magdalene stopped at an opening so low I had to duck to pass through. "This is as far as I've ever gone. The chain won't let me pass the threshold. But you can. You have to." Beyond the opening was a chamber that defied belief. The ceiling soared high enough that my lantern couldn't find it, disappearing into darkness that felt more like sky than stone. The walls weren't walls, but curtains of living silver, flowing slowly like wax down the sides of a candle. They formed patterns, swirls, and spirals, symbols that looked almost like language, faces that appeared and dissolved in the metallic flow. And in the center, growing up from the floor like an obscene tree, was the heart. It was massive, the size of a wagon, pulsing with a rhythm I felt in my bones. Not metaphorically, literally. Each beat sent vibrations through the stone, through the air, through me. The surface was translucent, revealing layers of silver veins running through tissue that looked disturbingly organic. It grew from a nexus point where the cave floor had split open, roots of pure silver spreading out in all directions like a nervous system. I understood immediately. This wasn't a mine. It was a parasite. The mountain wasn't harboring the silver. The silver was feeding on the mountain, growing through it like fungus through wood, and the only thing keeping it contained was the contract Ezekiel Payne had made. A human life, bound in service, acting as a valve to control the flow. Without Magdalene, the silver would spread unchecked, consuming the mountain and probably everything around it. With her, it bled slowly, controllably, making men rich while she suffered. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "Wrong deity." Magdalene's voice came from behind me. "She's older than your God. older than any name we have for holy. She's what lived in the earth before men learned to dig, before men existed at all. I approached the heart carefully, feeling the heat radiating from it. The air shimmered with temperature and something else. Potential, possibility, the promise of wealth beyond measure if I just reached out and claimed it. All I had to do was leave Magdalene in her chains, maybe even offer her more years in exchange for more silver. I could be rich, powerful. Everything I'd lost, I could get back tenfold. The thought was so seductive I actually raised my hand toward the heart's surface before I caught myself. This was how it worked. This was how it got you. The mountain didn't force you to be evil. It just made evil seem reasonable, profitable, justified. It whispered that sacrifice was necessary for success, that some people were worth more than others, that power came to those willing to pay any price except their own. "Stop," Magdalene said sharply. "Don't touch it directly. Use iron. Only iron keeps the contract contained." I pulled back, shaking. My thoughts felt clearer immediately, like surfacing from deep water. How do I break it? The bolt that holds my chain is driven through the heart's primary root. You have to remove it. But the moment you do, the contract ends. The mountain will wake fully, and she'll be. Magdalene paused, searching for words. Imagine a river that's been dammed for 30 years suddenly breaking free. That's what will happen. She'll flood through every tunnel, reclaim every ounce of silver that was taken, and anyone still inside will die, immediately and creatively. She handed me a chisel from somewhere in her dress. Where she'd been keeping it, I didn't want to know. "This is iron for my chain. Pieces break off sometimes. It's the only metal that can cut the root without triggering a defensive response. You'll have one chance. Hit the right spot, break the connection, and run. We'll have maybe 5 minutes to reach the surface before the mountain closes in." I took the chisel. It was cold, colder than any metal should be, and heavier. "And you? My chain will break when the contract does. I'll be right behind you." Her hand touched my shoulder, the first time she'd made physical contact. Her skin was fever hot. "Thank you, whether this works or not. Thank you for seeing me as human." I wanted to say something profound, something that matched the moment's weight, but all I managed was, "Let's not die." The root was exactly where she'd said, a thick cord of silver growing through the stone, wrapped around an iron bolt that had been driven so deep it might as well have been part of the mountain's skeleton. I positioned the chisel, raised the hammer I'd brought from Silas's equipment, and prayed to whatever god or gods might give a damn about fools in dark places. The first strike rang like a bell, echoing through the chamber. The heart convulsed, and the silver on the walls flowed faster. Second strike. The root split slightly, leaking something that wasn't blood but served the same purpose. Clear fluid that hissed when it hit stone. Third strike. The bolt shifted. Fourth strike. The mountain screamed. Not with sound, with pressure, with sudden violent awareness, with the weight of something immense and ancient turning its attention fully onto the irritant that had dared to wound it. The heart's rhythm stuttered, accelerated, and the chamber began to shake. Again, Magdalene shouted over the grinding of stone against stone. "One more." I swung with everything I had. The chisel sheared through the last of the root. The bolt came free, and the heart stopped. Complete, absolute silence. Even the pulse I felt in my bones cut off, leaving a void so profound I thought I'd gone deaf. Then the walls began to move. Not collapse. That would have been mercy. They crawled, flowed, closed in like a mouth preparing to swallow. The silver retreated, pulling back from every surface, draining away to some deeper place. The ceiling dropped, and somewhere above us, I heard the support timbers begin to fail. "Run!" Magdalene grabbed my hand, yanking me toward the exit. Her chain was gone, snapped at the ankle like it had never existed. She moved with inhuman speed now, pulling me through passages that had already started to narrow. Behind us, the chamber imploded, the heart dragging everything near it into whatever dimension or hell it truly belonged to. We ran through crystalline caves that shattered as we passed, through tunnels that closed seconds after we cleared them, past branching passages that sealed themselves, the mountain erasing its own violated spaces. The air was full of dust and the smell of burning stone, and my lungs felt like they were full of ground glass. Magdalene didn't slow. She was laughing. High, wild, desperate laughter that echoed with 3 decades of imprisonment ending in fire and chaos. Almost there. The main shaft is just ahead. She was right. I could see light now, real daylight, impossibly bright after hours underground. The entrance was 50 feet away. 40, 30. The mountain groaned behind us, a sound so deep it was more felt than heard. The noise of something dying badly. We burst out of the entrance into afternoon sunlight. I fell to my knees, gasping, blood running from my nose from the pressure changes. Magdalene stood above me, her face turned up to the sky, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on her face. Behind us, the Iron Maiden collapsed. Every tunnel, every shaft, every carefully engineered passage folded inward as the mountain reclaimed itself. Dust rose in a choking cloud, and somewhere deep below, the last of the silver disappeared. The parasite finally cut away. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but solid rock and the memory of what had been. The mine was gone. The curse was broken, and Magdalene was free. She looked at me with eyes that were still wrong, still full of silver and darkness, but maybe a little more human. Where do we go now? I had no idea, but for the first time in years, the weight on my chest was gone. The running was over. Whatever came next, we'd face it in daylight. Anywhere but here, I said. Anywhere at all. We made it as far as the valley floor before the town found us. They heard the collapse, impossible not to. The sound had rolled through Bitter Springs like thunder, rattling windows and sending everyone running to their doors. They came with rifles, torches despite the daylight, and faces painted with fear and fury. Bitter Springs had depended on the Iron Maiden. The mine was their economy, their future, their reason for existing in this godforsaken pocket of nowhere. And I just destroyed it. The sheriff reached us first, his horse lathered with sweat from the hard ride. He looked at the collapsed mountainside, at me covered in dust and blood, at Magdalene standing beside me like a fevered dream made flesh. His hand went to his gun. "What in hell did you do?" His voice shook, not with anger, but with the terrible realization that everything his town had built was gone. That mine was our lifeblood. 50 men worked those shafts. 20 families depended on the wages. You just killed us all. The mine was killing you anyway, I said, spitting dust. Slowly, one man at a time. How many more were you willing to sacrifice? How many more Silases? How many more Jacobs? They knew the risks. The crowd had grown behind the sheriff, 24 angry faces closing in. Every man who went down there knew the mountain was dangerous, but they chose to work anyway because the pay was worth it. You had no right. He had every right. Magdalene's voice cut through the noise like a knife, and every man there froze. They saw her clearly now, saw what the mountain had made of Ezekiel Payne's daughter. Some crossed themselves. Others raised their guns. I was the price you paid for 30 years of silver. Me, a living girl fed to something that should have stayed buried. And every man who died in that mine died because my father's bargain was wrong from the beginning. You can't build prosperity on human sacrifice and expect it to last. Who the hell are you? The sheriff's gun was out now, aimed at her center mass. I'm the ghost you pretended didn't exist. The curse you told yourselves was just bad luck. I'm Magdalene Payne, and I've been in that mountain since 1843, kept alive by dark magic and darker bargains. This man freed me. If you want to blame someone for your troubles, blame my father. Blame Silas. Blame every owner who knew I was down there and chose profit over mercy. The crowd murmured, uncertain. The name Payne carried weight. Ezekiel Payne had been a legend in these parts, the man who'd founded the richest silver mine in Colorado Territory. But the daughter? Most men there had never heard of a daughter. An old woman pushed through the crowd, her face mapped with wrinkles and bad memories. "I remember," she said, her voice cracking with age. "There was a girl. Ezekiel brought her to town once or twice when he first started digging. Pretty thing, dark hair, always carried a book. Then she disappeared. He said she died of fever, but she stared at Magdalene with wide eyes. Lord save us, you're her. You're real. I'm real. Magdalene's voice softened slightly. And I'm sorry your town is suffering, but I couldn't stay down there anymore. I couldn't be the sacrifice that made your comfort possible. So what? A miner pushed forward, young and angry and scared. We're supposed to just accept this, pack up and leave? This town will be dust in 6 months without the mine. Then build something else, I said. Find another way, but don't build it on blood. Easy for you to say. You're not the one losing everything. The young miner spat on the ground near my feet. You blew into town, destroyed our livelihood in a day, and now you're giving speeches about morality? Where were you when Silas was hiring? Where were you when Jacob's widow needed help? You don't get to burn down what you didn't build and call it righteousness. He had a point, a painful, uncomfortable point. I'd acted without thinking about consequences beyond the immediate. Free the prisoner, break the curse, damn the collateral damage. That wasn't heroism. That was selfishness dressed in noble intentions. But then Magdalene spoke again. The mountain isn't empty. Every eye turned to her. The silver's gone, yes. The heart is dead. But there's something else down there, deeper than we went. I felt it during the collapse. Chambers I never reached. Spaces the silver never touched. Gold, maybe. Copper. Something. She looked at the crowd, at their desperate faces. The Iron Maiden mine is finished. But the Iron Maiden mountain still has secrets. They just won't cost anyone their soul to find them. It was a thin hope. Prospecting was expensive, dangerous, and mostly ended in failure. But it was hope, and desperate people will clutch at thinner threads than that. The crowd's hostility eased fractionally, fear transforming into calculation. If there was gold, she's lying, the sheriff said, but his heart wasn't in it. This is a trick to save themselves. Maybe, I agreed. Only one way to find out. Form a new company. Pool resources. Start digging where the silver wasn't. If she's right, you rebuild. If she's wrong, you are dying anyway. The crowd broke into arguments, shouting over each other, accusations flying. But the guns were lowering. That was something. The sheriff holstered his weapon with obvious reluctance, then pointed a finger at me. You're responsible for this. If the mountain's empty, if there's nothing left to find, I'm holding you accountable. That blood will be on your hands. Get in line, I said. There's already plenty there. They let us go, not out of mercy, but because they had bigger problems to worry about. We took the sheriff's suggestion to leave before sunrise and ran with it. I bought supplies, loaded my horse, and by midnight, we were riding east toward the sunrise and whatever lay beyond Bitter Springs. Magdalene rode beside me in silence for the first hour. She'd borrowed clothes from the general store, proper clothes, a riding dress and boots that fit. Her hair was clean, tied back. In normal light, away from the mountain's influence, she looked almost human. The wrongness was still there in her eyes, in the way she moved, but muted. Healing, maybe. I don't know how to be free, she finally said. Neither do I. I glanced at her. We'll figure it out together. You don't have to stay with me. You've done enough. True, but where else am I going? Forward's as good as any direction when you've burned every bridge behind you. She smiled, a real smile this time, small but genuine. Forward, then. We rode through the night, putting miles between ourselves and Bitter Springs. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant and beautiful. Somewhere behind us, the Iron Maiden stood silent, her silver heart stopped, her curse broken. Somewhere ahead, there were towns we'd never seen, lives we could build from scratch, mistakes we'd probably make again. But for now, there was just the road, the stars, and the strange freedom of having nothing left to lose. 3 months later, I read in a Denver newspaper that Bitter Springs had found gold. Not in the Iron Maiden. They'd been smart enough not to dig there again, but in a ravine 2 miles north that the silver had always overshadowed. Rich deposits, easily accessed, no curses attached. The town was booming. Population doubled. New buildings going up every week. They'd named the strike the Magdalene Vein, as a thank you or an apology, or maybe just superstition. Miners are funny that way. Magdalene and I were in New Mexico territory by then, running a boarding house in a town too small for a name. We'd bought the place with what little money I had left. A building so run down it was practically free. She'd wanted something simple, she said. Something that involved feeding people instead of feeding on them. She was good at it. Guests were wary at first. She had that quality that made people uncomfortable. That sense of being slightly wrong in a way they couldn't articulate. But she was patient, kind, and her cooking was astonishing. Within a month, we were the most popular lodging for 50 miles. Cowboys, prospectors, traveling merchants, they all stopped at Magdalene's place, drawn by word-of-mouth reputation and the best apple pie in the territory. She still didn't sleep well. Most nights I'd find her on the porch, staring at the stars like she was memorizing them in case they disappeared. The mountain still lived in her eyes, still echoed in her dreams. Freedom wasn't clean or complete. It was messy, painful, a constant renegotiation between who she'd been and who she was trying to become. "Do you regret it?" she asked me one night. We were sitting in the cooling desert evening, the stars like ice chips scattered across velvet. Freeing me? Destroying the mine? All those people in Bitter Springs who could have starved. Every day, I admitted, but I'd do it again. Why? Because some debts have to be paid even when paying costs everything. Because every time I look at you, I remember what it's like to be human. I drank coffee that was more chicory than bean. We're not good people, Magdalene. I've done things that would make your mountain look gentle. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the only shot at redemption is recognizing you need it. Redemption. She tasted the word. Is that what this is? Call it what you want. I call it forward motion. Better than standing still while everything rots. A guest came out onto the porch then. A young prospector, barely 20, who'd paid for a week in advance. He nodded politely, started to speak, then stopped, staring at Magdalene. His face went white. "Ma'am," he said slowly. "Have we met before?" "I don't believe so." "You sure? Because you look exactly like." He swallowed hard. "There's a portrait in Bitter Springs, in the new town hall. They say it's Magdalene Payne, the woman the gold vein is named after. But that can't be you. That portrait is from 1843. Magdalene smiled, the expression not quite reaching her strange eyes. Must be a family resemblance. Common name. He didn't look convinced, but he was polite enough not to push. He went back inside, though I saw him glance back twice, doubt and recognition warring on his face. "That'll keep happening," I said. "I know." She wasn't bothered. Let them wonder. Let them tell stories. Maybe in those stories, I'll become something useful. A cautionary tale. A ghost that reminds people not to dig too deep or bargain too rashly. Better that than forgotten. You could never be forgotten. Neither could you. She touched my hand briefly. We're both ghosts in our own way, haunting ourselves more than any place. She was right. I still saw the faces of men I'd wronged, debts unpaid, betrayals that had led me west. The Iron Maiden hadn't been my first sin or my last, but it had been a turning point, a moment where I'd chosen someone else's freedom over my own profit. That had to count for something, didn't it? A year later, I heard the Iron Maiden had collapsed completely. The entire mountainside came down in a landslide during spring thaw, burying the last traces of tunnel and shaft and the dark heart that had fed on human sacrifice. They said it was natural, just geology doing what geology does. But the old woman who'd remembered Magdalene wrote a letter, found its way to me somehow. That disagreed. The mountain remembered. She wrote in shaky script. She remembered what was taken and what was given. She remembered her heart being cut out. And when she was ready, she covered her shame and went to sleep. Let her rest. Let her forget. Some curses are broken not by heroes, but by time and the mercy of letting go. I never showed Magdalene the letter. She had enough ghosts without adding one more. Instead, I folded it carefully and buried it in the yard behind our boarding house, deep enough that no one would dig it up by accident. Let the mountain rest. Let the past stay buried. Because here's what I learned in that mine, in that darkness, staring at a heart that pulsed with stolen life. Some treasures aren't worth the price. Some bargains are poison wrapped in gold. And freedom, real freedom, isn't about escaping your chains. It's about choosing not to chain anyone else. Magdalene never went back to Bitter Springs, never visited the vein named in her honor or saw the prosperity that rose from her suffering. She had her boarding house, her garden, her apple pies that made grown men weep with memory. She had stars she could see every night, and air that didn't taste of stone. And she had me, a man with more regrets than money, more past than future, but enough stubborn hope to keep moving forward. We weren't heroes. We weren't even good people. But we were free, and we paid for that freedom in silver and stone and 3 decades of darkness. The mountain remembers, but so do we. And our memories, painful as they are, remind us that some debts can be paid, some curses can be broken, and sometimes, when you reach into hell and pull someone out, you save yourself in the process. That has to be enough, because it's all we've got. The end. See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you.